And there are a lot of Albertans who are not happy with the way things are going, the way the province has been treated over the years. And they are talking more and more about going their own way. Now, I have a chart that I can bring up, and just so that we can have a look at kind of the history, because it's not the first time that Quebec or Alberta has talked about separating as well. So let's take a look at this.
Right.
Okay, so we have very early roots. So between 1905 and the 1930s, very quickly, Alberta becomes a province in 1905. Then you have early grievances over federal control of natural resources, resources not transferred to Alberta until 1930. Seeds of Western alienation are planted, which is really like, I mean, it's like we've heard this story before, Eddie. You know?
Right.
So anyhow, let's just keep rolling along here. In 1980 to 85, the National Energy Program under Pierre Trudeau.
Of all people.
Yeah, and basically he was nationalizing some of the programs, or the resources, the oil-based resources, and went in and was rather heavy-handed about it. Then, you know, you have massive resentment in Alberta, sparking sentiment spikes. Western Canada Concept Party wins a seat in Alberta legislature in 1982, and that is the high watermark, apparently, historically. So then we go to the 1990s into the 2000s, and, you know, it was dormant, but now the feeling and talk of separation is re-emerging. Separatism fades as oil booms and Reform Party channels anger federally. So, yeah, you had the Reform Party coming on the scene, and they were going after Ottawa. And the issue remains culturally present, but politically marginal at that particular point, because things were good. And we all know that a lot of Maritimers, a lot of Eastern Canadians, but in particular a lot of Maritimers and people from Newfoundland and Labrador went out west to Fort Mac, and they worked hard and they made big money over those years. Okay, so then we get into 2015 to 2019. Election of Justin Trudeau's Liberals reignites Western alienation. Pipeline cancellations, carbon pricing, and regulatory disputes intensify frustration. Man, is he ever following in the footsteps of his old man and taking it up a notch or two? Then we have the Wexit movement emerging after the 2019 federal election. Wexit, Brexit, you know, away we go. So the modern movement takes shape beginning in 2020. Wexit Alberta merges with the Freedom Conservative Party to form the Wild Rose Independence Party of Alberta, in the first serious attempt in decades to organize separatism provincially. 2021 to 2022, multiple small separatist parties form Independence Party of Alberta, the Republican Party of Alberta. I'd forgotten about that. Support remains fragmented and electorally weak at that point. 2023, Danielle Smith wins the UCP leadership and later provincial election. Introduces the Alberta Sovereignty with a United Canada Act. That's a mouthful. Not separation, but a major escalation in autonomy rhetoric. And with, you know, to me, that's fair ball. That is fair ball from that perspective. Into last year, advocacy groups like the Alberta Prosperity Project gained traction, and a push for referendums on Alberta pension plan, provincial police force, and broader sovereignty independence. And in 2025, Alberta passes legislation lowering barriers for citizen-initiated referendums, So they brought down the required number of signatures. Elections Alberta approves wording of a separation referendum question, procedural approval, not authorization, just that it met the criteria set under the regulations. And it was sent to the legislature, but it sits in the legislature at the moment. Separatist groups declare this, of course, as a breakthrough. Early this year, Stay Free Alberta campaign currently collecting signatures in favor of holding the referendum. The group needs 178,000 signatures by May 2nd to be successful. And they've been really busy in the last 2 weeks or so under
door-to-door campaigns.
Yeah, and it's under a different umbrella, and you'll see that in a few minutes. Opposing citizens group Alberta Forever Canada has more than 400,000 verified signatures according to Elections Alberta. They've already submitted, and they have Elections Alberta has verified the signatures on their petition. And that, as I say, now Elections Alberta has submitted that petition to the Legislative Assembly. Now, the other group in favor of the referendum and pushing out, and they're at 172,000, but as you noted, they've been door to door, and they've been holding a lot of town hall information meetings, and they're getting fairly good crowds as well. It seems that as time goes on, the crowds are getting larger. However, recent polling shows support for separation is increasing, believe it or not. It now stands around 30%, while 62% say they are against separation. So that's kind of a time capsule on the whole movement in Alberta. They feel that their voices have not been heard, that they have been ignored, by Ottawa, by back east. And they have a real issue with that. They want more control over their resources, how they're handling them, and they want more cooperation from the feds to get projects moving forward that will help get their resources to market. Again, to me, a reasonable
I don't blame them.
request. Yeah,
absolutely, I agree.
A very reasonable request. So, before we get into one other thing I have here, we do have a comment already, so let's get that up. And Deborah says, before we let Alberta go, we should take a hard look at transfer payments. They are paying for provinces that block their progress. And really, are they actually have-not provinces? And of course, she's referring to Quebec, which gets the largest, 30 billion. Ontario, which I find hard to believe, getting transfer payments. And then, and I've heard Premier Danielle Smith and others in Ottawa, including those who are pushing for the referendum, say that they have no issue with sharing resources with have-not provinces. But they do have an issue with Quebec getting the amount of money it's getting. It gets the largest amount of any province in Canada. Explain that to me.
I can't, Gary. I've been scratching my head for years on that one. I really can't. And you know what? That's a subject for another day. Here in Quebec, we still piss the money away. But anyway, that's another subject.
Yeah. And then you've got Ontario as well. Like I'm looking at Ontario, I'm thinking, why? Why are they getting even, it's nowhere near what Quebec is getting, but still, why are they getting what they're getting? I find that one hard to believe. And, I really think that it's time to reconstitute the equalization transfers. Okay, and we have Deborah weighing in once again. Quebec is in a dream world. How can you separate when you're getting the lion's share of transfer payments? Do they expect it to keep coming? I don't blame Alberta for how it feels. Okay, so let's move along here. Now, there was a recent rally, I think it was earlier this week, if I'm not mistaken, being put on by the group pushing to get the referendum and looking at a different way of government. And there was, at the very end of the rally, there was a woman who sits on the panel who gave a longer speech. I found a spot that I thought kind of fit into the discussion tonight without going on for about 8 or 10 minutes. So I want to play this and really set our discussion.
The referendum will not be the end of the conversation. It will be the beginning of a more honest one. And that is what gives this moment meaning. That is what excites me. Enough with the games. We are tired of being told to sit down and shut up. We are done with that. Self-determination is not radical. Democratic participation is not dangerous. Asking a question is not treason. An informed, engaged citizenry is not a threat to democracy. It is proof that democracy is still alive. Alberta's future will not be built by those who tremble at the thought of self-government, but by those willing to meet it head-on with clarity, integrity, and resolve. This moment requires confidence, confidence in ourselves, confidence in our fellow Albertans, confidence in our democratic process. The people have a voice, the people have a will, and when that will is known, it must be respected. That's democracy, that is self-determination, and that is the future we're prepared to build together.
Now, I left that part with the crowd. I wanted you to be able to see the crowd they did have in that hall.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where that was, but you know they're calling it Freedom Countdown because they've got until May 2nd to get as many signatures as possible in favor of pushing forward with the referendum and going on from there.
Well, you know what? At least they've actually identified a full-blown, written in English, clear referendum question. And now, you know what? Hats off to them. They didn't beat around the bush. A black and white question, as opposed to what we had here in Quebec in 80 and 95, which was basically a convoluted half paragraph on, do you want to separate, but we still want to be in Canada's best interest, and you know, vice versa, scratch our back, scratch your back. Wasn't even a proper referendum question. So you know what, we basically went by, yes, we're going to separate, no, we're not going to separate, and just eliminated all that other fluff. So you know what, hats up to the Alberta legislature for getting a clearly cut question that will be posed to the population of Alberta. I think that was well done.
It's interesting in the fact that we're talking about Alberta, and when you listen to her talking, and it's too bad we didn't have time to play her whole speech, but we did. We don't. But she did talk about, you know, there's fear-mongering going on out there. The day after, if they're successful, nothing's going to change. You're still going to get up in the morning. You're still going to have your hospitals and your schools and everything functioning. The way that they're now starting to promote it is it's going to give Alberta a much better position, a stronger position to say to the federal government, look, this isn't right. We want a better deal. And the federal government is going to have to listen. And, you know, again, they are looking at leaving the Canada Pension Plan in favor of their own pension plan. And the precedent's already been set because Quebec has its own pension plan and, and no CPP. And that Alberta pension plan, I would imagine, would be pretty solid fairly quickly, with resource money, royalties going into it and everything. So, in being able to reinvest in the province. So, you can't blame them from that perspective either. And the way she was talking, they weren't talking, at least at this stage, of a complete exit, because a couple of people brought up during this town hall, like, well, what happens? We're landlocked. How do we sell our product and get it to market? And again, I'm sensing more and more as I dig into this and follow it a little more closely, that in fact they're just looking to be able to bolster their position and get the attention of Ottawa and keep the attention of Ottawa to push for a better deal and to be listened to, instead of having guys like Pierre Trudeau and his son Justin just roll in and roughshod over them, cancel pipelines, nationalize the oil industry, on and on it goes. But yet, at the same time, we're taking the royalties and taking bigger chunks of the royalties all the time.
Right.
Without any say.
Well, you know what? I think that, being a Quebecer, and we're speaking about Alberta, and I know folks out west, I think at this particular point in time, with the way things are going in the world, and Canada working hard, the government working hard to sustain our sovereignty, yes, we are going to continue to have our provinces demanding what's best for their constituents and voters, no question about it. And you know what? It used to be, those Albertans again are rattling the cage, and those Quebecers again are rattling the cage. And I think that's part of the problem with our country right now, that we were very, very separated. And you and I talked about, this whole thing with what's happening in the United States binding us together more so than in the last 30 to 40 years because of what El Presidente was doing in the United States, or threatening to do to Canada and the rest of the world. It has bonded us. Now, you have the separatist cages rattling in Quebec again. We mentioned earlier in our show, and you have Alberta. I don't really see it as a cage rattling session of separating. I think you're absolutely right, Gary, that Alberta not just a need to be noticed, they're demanding to be noticed for a variety of reasons. And I think that Canadians have to stop looking at, it's just those Albertans. No, they have a very, very important message to convey to Canada, Ottawa, and the rest of us are Canadians. That Alberta, along with Eastern Canada, being Ontario and Quebec, are just as important, if not more important. And this whole thing about a province being more important than the other, I think it just hurts our confederacy, the Confederation of Canada. And you look at some of the issues and concerns that Albertans have, and you try to automatically compare to Quebec. We're not comparing apples to apples here. There are two distinct mindsets in terms of why both provinces are rattling in the separatism cage right now. You're absolutely right. I mean, think about it, Gary. We go through a federal election. We talked about this during this last election, right? By the time Ontario polls close, the election is pretty much already decided. So, the Western provinces and the citizens in Western Canada, they kind of stick their hands up and say, well, what was the point of my voting? It's already been decided. That right there would alienate any state, province, call it what you want, whatever country. That's just a form of alienation in itself, just by the way our elections work here in Canada. So, that has to be fixed, and that has to be reformed sometime, somehow and sometime. You look at Alberta's push for, a referendum question. I mean, it's pretty much rooted in economics and resources and power. Oil and gas, taxation. You mentioned the pension plan, and too much federal regulation. Whereas you look at Quebec separation mandates, what they're looking for, it's all cultural. It's all about the French language. It's all about the culture. It's all about history. It's all about the civil laws that they're imposing nowadays, right? In terms of, Bill 21 and whatnot, the secularism laws here. So the reason why both provinces want to leave is completely different. You talked about how Ottawa treats them. Well, look, the Ottawa response has been so far very limited in terms of giving up any concessions. Trudeau Sr. was very hard on them, absolutely. Trudeau Jr. was just, 747 over the air or over the head, didn't even think about addressing it because he had other important photo shoots to attend and then media sessions, right? And then you look at the response Quebec got from Ottawa. I mean, Ottawa, they ended up in constitutional negotiations. They actually came up with language protections above and beyond what Quebec did to strengthen its language laws here in Quebec, and also the distinct society recognition. So, you know what? If I was an Albertan or any other province, I don't care if it's British Columbia, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or Newfoundland, you kind of look at the demographic of the country and say, why the hell are you bending over for Quebec and you won't even listen to us? So you know what? I completely understand Albertans' position these days, and it's an absolute shame that it's come to this. And you know what? By no means am I saying that Alberta has the right to separate from Canada. I can't forge an opinion on whether or not they're going to be better off without Canada. I think all of us together, as all provinces and all territories in Canada, makes the country stronger and makes the provinces stronger. Ottawa's got to find a way, and I don't mean the next after this mandate of Carney is over. We're going to wait for next time. No, sirree. This has got to be dealt with now within this 4-year term in terms of what are we going to do to make sure that all provinces are fairly represented and we're not just stealing resources from one province, selling them to whoever, and then dropping money into another province's coffers that shouldn't have to be dependent on that. You know what? And look, you mentioned this a few episodes ago. Alberta has learned from Quebec. They've learned what they got. They learned what concessions they got from Ottawa. They've learned about self-reliance and governing themselves, and the do's and don'ts of Quebec errors and what's worked for Quebec. By the same token, they're not stupid. Quebec used to be the economic powerhouse of Canada. 1976 changed that. 1980 referendum changed that. 1995 completely changed that. So the last thing that Albertans want is for international investment to peter out because of quote unquote instability, right? Instability will chase away business. So Albertans are not stupid. They know what they have to contend with. So you know what? I'm behind them positioning themselves to be better respected by the Canadian Federation, by Ottawa, as opposed to just standing still and letting everybody run roughshod over them. So I get it. I do not wish Alberta to separate. I personally believe they're going to struggle after a separation. There would be a transition period, but you're talking about loss of territory to the Canadian government, loss of territory to the native population, the indigenous people. You're speaking about border patrols. You're speaking about military presence. Everything. The entire infrastructure for them to secure themselves as a nation in the world order today is going to be extremely expensive. Are they going to be landlocked forever? I don't think so. Whether they separate or not, they're not going to be landlocked forever. Their biggest customer right now for natural resources and oil is the United States. Well, didn't the United States just secure the largest oil field on the planet in Venezuela? Well, what's going to happen with that particular market and what Albertans are getting in return from the United States in terms of purchasing Alberta oil? They're going to lose money on that too, potentially. Who knows how the economy is going to work? So, you know what? I don't blame the Albertans. I don't blame the Quebecers either for pushing for a separation from Canada question. They've got their reasons too, but I think cooler heads have to prevail in terms of what happens if we separate and what are going to be the consequences of this separation. maybe not immediate short-term pains, but long-term, absolutely. Look at Quebec. That's all I could say. Yeah, so that's my position on that. And distinct differences to our viewers. Quebec and Alberta's push for separation is for two purely different reasons.
The other part of it, before we go to another comment, the other part of it is Carney has been distant when it comes to what's happening in Alberta right now as far as this movement is concerned. Maybe he's trying to take a hands-off approach, doesn't want the federal government to appear to be heavy-handed and sticking its nose in. But there should be a level of leadership being shown. And yes, he has a full plate as far as trying to rebuild relationships around the world and open up new trade channels. I get it. But, I think he's going to have to scale back a bit and start paying attention to things closer at home. And I'll have a little more to say about that coming up in a moment. I guess really when people talk about Alberta separation, what they're really asking is whether Canada is leading or just reacting to frustration. And we want to know what you think about it. Drop a comment and let us know, and we will share it, just as we're going to share this one from Deborah. It's hard to lead when you're dealing with unstable governments. Carney's job is not an easy one, and I'm livid. The opposition, instead of being sober second thought, is deliberately sabotaging. Well, certainly the opposition as well. The opposition leader has not been doing.
This timing for posturing is just terrible.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. Thank you, because I was trying to be diplomatic, but it was really, really tough for me to be so. But Carney went in, negotiated with Smith about the new pipeline. And it was almost like, and sometimes I'm thinking, maybe some of these naysayers were right about this memorandum of understanding for the new pipeline, because there are a whole lot of hoops that have to be jumped through from the First Nations people. And Carney did meet with the First Nations group in BC before leaving for China. And the First Nations group seemed to be relatively satisfied with the tone of the meeting. I don't think anything significant was resolved, because in order to push that pipeline through, they have to drop a tanker ban. And the First Nations folks say, the bitumen, you don't clean that up. You just don't get rid of it if there's a spill.
Right.
However, I look at the other side of it, and we have bans on tankers going into our ports along the BC coast in that area. And yet you have tankers going back and forth to Alaska pretty much on a daily basis.
Yeah, not too far off our BC coast.
Exactly. So, there has to be some give and take there. But beyond the memorandum of understanding and a couple of meetings with Premier Smith very early on, in which she was on side, and of course we were right at the beginning of the trade war as well with the U.S., there hasn't been really a lot happening from the level of the Prime Minister down through the cabinet, even as far as Alberta is concerned. And in looking at this now, maybe they think that this group's not going to be successful in getting the number of signatures that's required to push it through.
But that's not the point, is it?
No, it's not. Is that leadership, or is that a lazy approach.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The man's got a lot that he has to deal with right now. In terms of, I mean, he's dealing with he's dealing with the ongoing sovereignty and existence of our country right now, and that takes precedence over everything. And we're talking about both from sovereignty and military perspective, our alliances, and economically. That's got to be top right off the bat. And you know what? He spent a lot of time in Europe. He's met a lot of leaders in Europe. There have been quite a few gatherings, the G7 summit and other summits around the world that he participated in. And you know what? We have a lot of dependence on Carney's success in China in terms of helping our poor farmers out in Middle Canada, in the prairie provinces, in terms of reestablishing a clear-cut understanding of what's being tariffed, why are we being tariffed on certain items, why are the Chinese being tariffed on certain items. I know there's going to be a huge discussion on the EVs and our tariffs on the EVs. I know Premier Ford is against any sort of reduction in levies and tariffs against electric vehicles from China. But like you all were saying, Gary, there's always room for compromise, and there has to be a give and a take. And there was always going to be the peanut gallery and the pundits who are going to criticize the gives as opposed to the takes out of all this. I really believe that once he gets China out of the way, and he continues to evolve our economy and wean ourselves from American dependency and their economy and their products. He continues to make small gains and small strides every month that we talk. He will, I believe he will. He's a smart man. He will turn his focus on internal Canadian affairs. I'm somewhat disappointed. He does have an interprovincial affairs minister. Well, where is this individual in this whole separatist movement in Alberta? He should be there front and center representing Carney, because Carney is a busy guy. But focuses have to shift. I don't think Carney is not one of those individuals who can only do one thing at a time. He can probably handle a dozen things at the same time. It's just a question of priority. And we'll see what happens upon his return from Asia. I'm looking forward to seeing a solid compromise, which is going to favor everyone as best as possible in this very difficult economy of the world right now. So we'll wait and see.
Well, let's leave it with this note, and that is Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, in the last referendum here in Quebec, which, as you know, was really, really close.
Yeah.
It was tight. Was very late to the party to start rallying support. I don't know if he didn't take it seriously or what the story was, but the feds were late to the party as far as getting out and getting the other side of the story out. And it damn near cost them the country.
Yeah.
History appears to be repeating itself in the fact that it seems the federal government, yes, has a lot of other things on its plate at the moment as well, but still this has to have a high level of priority just the same, to be getting the message out, spending time in Alberta, getting the message out that we hear you and we are working to do better. We are meeting with the Premier and your provincial officials, and we're trying to work through to get what's best for Alberta and for the country. But we're not seeing that yet.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm afraid that we're going to get to a point that it's going to be another case of reactive instead of being proactive on this whole issue.